and welcome everyone to the 31st lecture of the Kensei Foundation's Goodman Lecture Series. Our featured guest today is Anne Scheftel, and the lecture is entitled Devotion, Eternalism, and Conservation. I'm Sarah Wilkinson, co-chair of Kensei Foundation's Academic Development Committee, stepping in for our usual and much-loved host of the English language lectures, Trent Walker, who is also a member of the Academic Development Committee. As most of you know, the Kensei Foundation Goodman Lecture Series features lectures delivered by foremost Buddhist studies scholars and professionals from around the world. The series, which kicked off in 2021, is named for longtime Kensei Foundation friend and advisor, Professor Stephen D. Goodman, who left us in 2020. For those of us who were fortunate enough to know him, knew that he had a unique and playful teaching style that was a reflection of his great intellect and humor. And you could sense in all that he did the deep desire to make the Dharma accessible to others. The series is thus intended to honor Professor Goodman by offering presentations and discussions that create a bridge between academic and non-academic audiences. Our lectures are presented sometimes in English and sometimes in Chinese. Typically, we like to alternate between the two. Today, we welcome to our Goodman Lecture Series, art conservator Anne Scheftel, who has since 1970 worked for the conservation of Buddhist art with museums, universities, monasteries, and communities around the world. Scheftel is a fellow of the American Institute for Conservation and also a fellow of the International Institute for Conservation, and is a member of the Canadian Association of Professional Conservators. Scheftel earned a Master of Science in Art Conservation from Winterthur University of Delaware, a Master of Arts in the History of Art from the University of Michigan, and a Bachelor of Arts from Oberlin College. For over 55 years, Scheftel has worked with Tibetan Thangkas, including a 15-year apprenticeship with a Tibetan painting master. She has published several articles and given an extensive number of presentations and workshops, both scholarly and practical, regarding art conservation. In 1970, Scheftel established a nonprofit organization, Treasure Caretaker Training, which is dedicated to working with nuns and monks for the preservation of Buddhist treasures in monasteries and communities. Scheftel has earnestly expressed the wish that others follow in her footsteps and encourages anyone interested to use the Treasure Caretaker Training website and its Preservation of Buddhist Treasures resource, which is a free online reference with practical information for the preservation of Thangka, texts, and other sacred art, some of which we will hopefully be hearing about today. As mentioned, today's lecture is entitled Devotion, Eternalism, and Conservation, and Scheftel will be sharing with us her expertise and her experience of the work she has been doing and continues to do in Nepal, Bhutan, India, and on the Tibetan Plateau in China. Her richly illustrated presentation will share the approximately 55 years of her conservation of sacred art in museums, monasteries, and their communities. According to Scheftel, her on-site work combines devotion and meditation practice and incorporates ever-evolving science, digital technology, and artificial intelligence. She often seeks advice from Buddhist teachers as she works, taking special care to respect the tradition that she is working to preserve through her art conservation efforts. Scheftel holds that the Buddhist tenet of impermanence is profoundly relevant in conservation, with a middle way approach between eternalism and nihilism. Anne, we are so looking forward to hearing what you have to teach us. Everyone, please join Kensei Foundation in giving a warm welcome to Anne Scheftel to the Goodman Lecture Series.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us, both live and in video replay. I have gratitude to the Buddhist teachers whom since 1970 have advised my conservation work, to the Buddhist nuns, monks, community members, artists, and scholars who have graciously allowed me to interview them for this research. Thank you to the Kensei Foundation for this event and to our many individual donors, foundation and major donors, including Kensei Foundation, Pema Chodron Foundation, and Firebird Foundation. In Western museums, Buddhist art collections were often first shown in anthropology museums. This is the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, where I was first attracted to Buddhist art. I was 7 years old, and my public school class went to the museum by subway, and we saw this very exhibit exactly as you see it in the glass cases. This was in 1955. In 1970, I began research in monasteries and museums in India and Nepal. I visited the National Museum of Delhi Conservation Lab in 1970. Science is an essential component of conservation. Although this museum lab did not inspire me, conservation science works really hard to create methods and materials that help cultural heritage treasures, ready, last forever, and hopefully to do no damage. It is true that most conservators are eternalists. We endeavor to make our treasures last forever. However, according to the Madhyamaka, neither eternalists nor nihilists, their approach is neither particularly safe or accurate. In 1970, when I began researching sacred art in monasteries in India and Nepal, and interviewing Buddhist teachers and traditional painters and sculptors, I first encountered the 16th Karmapa at the Mahastupa in Sarnath, circumambulating with his 4 main disciples. Soon after, the 16th Karmapa told me, "This is your Dharma work for this lifetime, but don't do it for the money." He was referring to conservation of Buddhist treasures. In 1970, in Delhi, Geluk Rinpoche taught me about Thangka painting forgeries and fakes, one of his interests. His wife, Daisy, was a director of Tibet House at its first location in Delhi. Geluk Rinpoche's knowledge of Thangka fakes and forgeries is shared in our ongoing conservation workshops. I research especially great meditation masters who are also master painters. It's a special class of Thangkas, where a master painter paints a Thangka from his own meditation vision. This is Kamtrul Rinpoche VIII, who was a meditation master and painter and was very patient in answering all my questions about Thangkas in 1970. I know I'm really fortunate for that. In 1971, after I returned from India and Nepal, I interned in the Whitney collection with the curator Karen Burrows in the American Museum of Natural History in New York. When we went to take down this original exhibit, which had been that way in the glass cases since the 1920s, we opened one of the cases, and the very Thangka I had seen when I was 7 years old in 1955 fluttered down in pieces. We called a famous conservator of the time who came and took it away and worked on it. Years later, this museum and its Buddhist art collection became one of my museum clients. I trained in Thangka painting with the Range family. On the left, you see me and Nidra Range just very recently in Nepal in his garden. I'm grateful to them for sharing their knowledge. I went through years of graduate school with degrees in Buddhist art history and conservation and science. It's a long path. I worked in museums. I trained in museums. This is the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. But after years of graduate school, I was offered conservation positions in very prestigious museums. Trungpa Rinpoche reminded me that working in monasteries and for Buddhist communities was where I belonged. Now, when I give talks in museums, people generally listen, and for example, this is at the British Museum. However, a conservator who works in a museum conservation lab, who may work with one Thangka a year or has been to a monastery once, often gets more respect due to the name of the museum that is attached to theirs. I do enjoy the part of my professional work in museums. I'm called in for consultation with museum collections of tankas. I work closely with museum staff, and I do enjoy sharing the knowledge. I also love working in universities to work with students. Last week, I worked in the Rubin Museum traveling exhibit. This is in Salt Lake City. These are graduate students. And below that, that's in Beijing at the Central Academy of Fine Arts, where the students are training in conservation. I really enjoyed working with them as well. However, nuns and monks are my favorite people to work closely with on conservation learning and hands-on projects. This image is from the Kaju Munlam, where I was sharing techniques for documentation. But I still spent most of my time in monasteries. In this image, discussing with journalists the damaged wall paintings in Sechen Monastery in Kathmandu. This year, I'll go back to Nepal, as well as to Shanghai, to the Tibetan Plateau, to Surmang Monastery and other monasteries, to Beijing, to a conference at the Palace Museum, possibly to Mongolia, Korea, Ladakh, and back to Nepal. As for hands-on conservation, I still do hands-on conservation, but few conservators work on tankas in both the paintings and the textile parts. I feel that's really important to take them apart as little as possible. As a conservator, when I work in monasteries, this is often what I find. Very different from what you find in a museum exhibit. I have deep respect for traditions with butter lamps and incense, and the tankas rolled up in trunks, but those practices do cause some physical damage, as you can see. These are almost my favorite type of tankas. I call them monastery condition tankas. And I never tried to make them look new like posters. I would never do this. This tanka, it was the most beautiful tanka in an entire nation. It was a tanka of Machig. Some conservators came in and taught over cleaning. They washed it with water to make it lighter, and they washed away the fine details of the master painter, and then they just repainted it. This is not respectful. Did the cleaning make it look more sacred? No. So what was the point of this overcleaning? I believe never to try to make a historic tanka look like it was painted yesterday. Tankas are not dirty and therefore cannot be cleaned. There's no varnish layer on tankas like there is on Western oil paintings. Severe cleaning and filling in missing iconography for a tanka because you want it to appear clean and new is inaccurate. So please conserve historic blessed tanka by preventing damage. We prefer to simply stabilize the original and do digital restoration. Also, cleaning, so-called cleaning, that's done a lot on tankas these days, removes offering substances that were offered by the Chopan during pujas towards the shrine, and tankas receive some of that. It's disrespectful to clean away offering substances because you're cleaning away tangible evidence of the blessings. I feel strongly about this. I prefer digital restoration. You simply stabilize the condition of the original tanka, and you can restore it in the purely virtual digital realm. The original's photographed with high density, and then we work in the digital realm to bring back the way it probably looked. Here's a tanka from our study collection. The original still looks like the first image. It's been very deeply analyzed by my conservation science friends. We know everything about it. Then we worked with someone in digital restoration. Rather than trying to overclean and repaint the original, we leave it just as it is after stabilizing damage. We can bring it back to how it looked in the original in the purely virtual realm. This is in the center picture is halfway done, somewhat lightened, totally in the digital realm. And the final picture on the top is how it probably looked when it was originally painted. Again, the original is left just as it is. With the final picture, you can ask a Tonka painter to copy it to make a fresh painted version, or you can print this out and distribute it as prints put in traditional Tonka mountings, or you can distribute it virtually, digitally on the web to qualified people. We do a lot of conservation science, a lot of it. For example, this is a Tonka that was donated to our study collection. We researched it. When I looked at it, I said, oh, it looks like it's been worked on. In other words, some of the original Tonka colors were there, but there were other elements that were not right on the face, the hands, etc. So we did a lot of analysis. This is my way of sharing on the left the hunks of minerals, what traditional pigments look like, and the scientific periodic table to show what they are. And then we did further research to show what was original and what was not. This is so important. We do science in conservation for teachers and communities, but I also believe in working closely with living artists. Some living artists are trained Tonka painters, but the materials they're using are not exactly what was used centuries ago. So they want longevity in their traditional paintings. Other contemporary artists don't want longevity. They want their paintings to fall apart. And we work with them too. I'm very fortunate to have worked with living teachers through the years and to be trained as a conservator. So I consider it service in conservation, both for Buddhist teachers and in service to monasteries and their communities. These images are from 1991 at Rimtek Monastery, where I was invited by Jungrin Khantrul. And we're having tea there with Jalsep Rinpoche as well, discussing the work he wanted me to do, documenting and caring for the original Tonka paintings that were at Rimtek. Below's an image of that from that time. Different Buddhist teachers and artists with whom I've worked have interpreted the relationship between impermanence and preservation of sacred art with diverse approaches. There's no one answer. In unique cases, where the living artist can be interviewed, like my years with Trungpa Rinpoche interviewing him, his own paintings were damaged, and he wanted me to work with them in a specific way, which is different than working with paintings and sculptures where you don't know the artist. It's different with a living artist. This is Trungpa Rinpoche, whom I interviewed for many, many years and last saw him at his monastery Namu Buddha shortly before he died. Here he's in my conservation studio in Halifax, and he's looking at the original frame paintings, traditional full form of Tonkas of Trungpa Rinpoche. I'm grateful to Trungpa Rinpoche for his information. These paintings by Trungpa Rinpoche, which Trungpa Rinpoche really appreciated when he looked at them. These paintings were very damaged when he asked me to work with him on them. On the left is how one of them originally looked. And on the right is how the original looks now. And when you buy a print, after my extensive work on them, how they look. Trungpa Rinpoche asked me specifically to paint out all the damage. When I asked him about reversibility and authenticity that conservators are trained in, he said he wanted his vision to be seen, and he gave me specific instructions on which paint to use, how much damage I should disappear. But this is only possible with a living artist. Trungpa Rinpoche knew a lot about museums also, having spent time in Oxford. Together, in 1970s, we designed this deep frame for the entire Tonka form for museum use, where the entire Tonka form is set back. And many museums benefited from this after. We use this in many museums. And this was developed partially with Trungpa Rinpoche, every detail of the way the frame was developed. One day in Boulder, Colorado, I went down the basement of where Trungpa Rinpoche was living and opened the steamer trunk and found this we call it a shmata, a little rag that was all crunched up with some paint in it. I brought it to him and he started crying and said that it was his favorite painting and asked me if I could please save it. Save it, please, was exactly what he said. Most of the paint was lost and most of the detail was lost. So working closely with him, I managed to do humidification process to relax the painting support, and in fact did a lot of in-painting on this, and he supervised it. So now when you see it, you're not looking at the damage, you're seeing his vision. The best work a conservator can do, you never know that we were there. But you would only do this with the permission of a living artist. A similar scenario came up with his calligraphy, I Am Here Mugpo, which he painted on the wall, on wallboard of the original Dharma Center in Halifax. And when the center moved, the original panel with the M was a structural part of the office, so it was left. Only these two panels were left. And I was asked to recreate the first panel. Now, from a conservation point of view, this is basically creating a fake or forgery. And I wish that when this full calligraphy is on display, and it is now at KCCL at Dharma Center in Halifax, there was a little sign. I wish there were a sign saying that the entire first panel is my recreation. It was done by projecting images of the original, taken during flower arrangements and other casual pictures. I really would like to have the first panel, although it's a perfect match. I wish that there was a sign saying that this is a recreation. Through the years, many great respected teachers have been so kind to our work in preservation. Dojo Rinpoche in Sikkim, when I worked in Sikkim, he always would bless the work and do mows for its future, successful future. He himself knew he was dying and had a text he wanted to teach, had never been illustrated. So he hired a Thangka painter to come and illustrate it. And he worked with a Thangka painter for 3 years to get every image right. Through the centuries, not many people actually could read texts. So Thangkas and statues were their way of knowing what to visualize. Remember, there was a lot of illiteracy. So therefore, he knew, even in this day and age, that more people would look at the Thangkas of his texts than read the actual texts, even if they were translated. These are my favorite pictures of that time because he looked like this, very, very humble, even though he was a great Nyingma master. But in the Thangka painting series, the painter so respected him that this is how people remember him. His face is beautiful, beautifully groomed. He's wearing brocades and he's sitting gently. Although in actual fact, he was such a humble teacher and so brilliant, and we're grateful for his blessings for our work. Songtsar Khyentse Rinpoche asked me not to talk about the work I did for him, most of it in his Labrang, and I won't. However, this is interesting because this painting was needed in a few days for a vast empowerment, which I was lucky to attend, but there wasn't time to have it framed in Delhi. So I suggested that we have in Beer a local framer make a frame. We shipped the ultraviolet filter plexiglass from Delhi and archival quality mat board. Working with his monks and lay staff in his Labrang, we properly archivally mounted it, and they chose the turquoise color for the mat. Please note that the proportions of the mat refer to Thangka mounting, more on the bottom and top than the sides. The sacred is an intangible quality that's located in tangible objects. And as conservators, we work with tangible things with our hands. The discussion about sacred is so interesting because it's intangible. And a big question for people on a very personal level and a professional level is what defines something in a material object as being sacred? Is there a line up to where it's not sacred and all of a sudden it becomes sacred? Or is it something in its physical makeup that makes it sacred? Or is there a ceremony that makes it sacred? Or can something happen to it in its lifetime that takes away the sacred qualities? When I work in a monastery, either alone or with my team, we're working closely with monks, nuns, and community members, and the shrine room is an alive, sacred space. It's empowered. There's people coming to practice there while we're working at all times. Here we're documenting sasas in an empowered shrine room where people are doing a lot of practice. This is in Raja Nunnery on the very high plateau of Nepal, Sum. However, and this is quite interesting because it was unique, I worked in a small village temple in the same area in Sum in Nepal. And we were invited, the team, to enact conservation measures on everything in this small village shrine, every single thing. And so the senior lama did the ceremony I've actually never seen, you rarely see it. He disempowered the entire temple, the shrine and the entire temple. He asked the deities to go away, to not have any presence there at all, because after that, the community members took down everything from the shrine and we worked on everything together. And he and the other community members worked with us every day on these. It is true that when we were done with our work, after, the community had a blessing and they came in and everyone from the surrounding villages came and they re-empowered. The deities were invited back into the bodies of the deities there in physical form. The intangible was invited back in the ceremony into the tangible form. So let's discuss empowerment, how this happens. How does it get empowered? How does it represent the energy of the deities? If there's no inscription, can you tell it was blessed? If a conservation treatment obscures the blessings, does it affect the blessed quality? And are sacred artworks still blessed if they've been in a museum storage for decades or if they've been in somebody's living room? This is a visible empowerment. And the tanka I worked on. The tanka form is three-dimensional. In this case, you can see where the seed syllables are placed because I used transmitted light in that you're viewing the back of the painting, but the light source comes through the front of the painting. So you can see where on Great Vajradhara the syllables are placed. It's called transmitted light. It's one of our techniques. On this tanka, it's very important that it was documented that the 16th Karmapa empowered it. Another form of visible empowerment is when a teacher dots in the eyes on a painting or a statue. Here, Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche is dotting in the eyes in a statue. This is a visible empowerment. You can see constant visible re-empowerment and use of traditional empowerment and blessing and devotional techniques on traditional sacred art in its source culture. In Nepal since the 60s, thousands of Buddhist and Hindu sculptures were stolen from private and public temples, shrines, courtyards, fountains, and fields. They had been actively worshipped as living deities. Now with the drive for repatriation, and here's a notice that the Art Institute of Chicago is returning this 12th century Buddhist sculpture to Nepal. And here is a post showing that it's been returned and now it's returned to its traditional use in the community, being blessed. It's not exactly what a museum person would feel is proper care for an artwork that's so valuable. However, gone back to the source community, it's being treated appropriately. Okay, a non-visible empowerment. This is a good example. Taklan Setral Rinpoche was the head of the Nyingma lineage. He knew he was dying. His last wish, even though he was in a wheelchair, was to visit as many small village temples as he could. So he was carried around to village temples I was there. This is in Bhutan. And he gave many blessings. And it was considered that everything in the temple where he gave his blessings was considered blessed, with no added visual indication of it. No seed syllables, no dotting of the I's or anything. It's considered very blessed. To this day, those temples are considered blessed. This is an example of where he went. You may ask, does every Buddhist painting get blessed? I'm still interviewing since 1970. This is a living painting master in Nepal. He's Nawari. His name is Luk Chitrakar, and he happens to be on the board of our nonprofit. You won't be able to hear him too well in this video, but he's explaining to you that his paintings, if they're painted for a temple or somebody that actually practices, then it gets blessed. But if it's painted, he calls it for adornment, then it does not get blessed. In terms of making a puja, when you're finished with a painting, how do you bring the energy of the deity into the painting? Do you do a ceremony?
Yeah, if that is a confirm for one shrine or confirm for some puja place of somebody, that is the important completion ceremony. Otherwise, this is for adorn on the room, like aesthetic enjoying. That is not. I don't suggest or I don't do myself puja. If
So I know that that's hard for you to hear. I'll be glad to share that with anybody that wishes me to send them that video. It's very, very interesting. So visible empowerments are considered quite respected. Yet sometimes, those of you who have been to Nepal and other places, there are a lot of tourist tankas on the back with fake empowerments like this. The seed syllables are in the wrong location in relationship to the deity on front, and it's just anybody's hand, and that's considered very disrespectful. But who's to say what's fake and what's not? I purchased this in a market in Asia. The seller said that it was 14th century and it was worth $20,000 US. And I had to pay that. It was a great treasure. And I said, being a conservator, I'm sorry. I know you painted this yesterday and smoked it with your own pork dinner. And he said, you're right. And he sold it to me for $3. He thought it was really funny that I could tell. So then I had it analyzed by my science friends who said that in fact there was magnesium, manganese, and other indications of fake coloring and smoking. However, so I kept this as a fake. However, in Halifax, a teacher came through town, wanted to do a white Tara empowerment, and he wanted a picture of white Tara in a certain size to hold up as the icon image. So I said, well, all I have is this fake. He said, no problem. So this was used in an empowerment for thousands of people as the icon image, although it had originally started its life as an out-and-out fake, smoked with pork dinner. And we would all say that at this time, it is fully an empowered object. In terms of impermanence and conservation, eternalism, it's important to discuss outmigration. There's theft from traditional source countries, and there's also outmigration, whereas the younger generations leave for economic, educational dreams, and also they see things on the internet that lives they would like to lead. And their ancestors in the traditional homes are left with no one to take on the traditions or the hereditary shrine art that was there in their families for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is a video that I was privileged to be allowed to take. This woman, she left this small village in the Himalayas when she was 8 with her family. And 40 years later, she returned from New York City, from Queens, to see her family home, and nothing was left. This monk was her best friend when they were children. Her family owned way up the mountain and farmed it. This is an ongoing consideration, outmigration. Why? Because the family treasures are still there. And if no one's left to inherit them, what's happening to them? And so our treasure caretaker training team is helping develop small community museums to serve as repositories so the treasures don't get stolen or sold. Sometimes people that haven't traveled to source communities think that this is a very traditional shrine room. This is a monk who's a very close friend of mine. And he let me take this picture of him actually, he sent me this picture of him in his family shrine room in a very small village in Bhutan. He's a lineage holder in his village. It looks very traditional. However, this is what it really is like. Are you ready? He's reading his text from his smartphone. He's sitting at his grandfather's puja table, which is 200 years old, but on it he has a printed Dharma book. His grandfather's texts and treasures are in the old storage trunk. And the traditional tankas, yes, there are family heirloom tankas. There's also paintings stuck on the wall, prints and photos. He has in his family shrine room some of the first plastic prints of tankas that were more than 40 years old. And he has a newer tanka from a local community. This is realistic. This is the way things are. And also, traditional texts are often being read on people's smartphones and iPhones and projected at big ceremonies. The thing about this is that there's a lot of funding these days to preservation of traditional texts through digitization. But there's less funding, very little, towards preservation of the original form of the texts. So just the information is being saved. And as a conservator, I would like more funding to go to preserving the actual original blessed texts. Our nonprofit works in monasteries, and we would love for those of you watching now and in video replay to join us sometime in our work in monasteries. We work through a registered nonprofit in the US. So people think that these projects are just mine. They're not. We have all of these people on our team overseeing everything we do. Our project visionaries are mostly Buddhist teachers, and whenever I take on a new project, I ask their advice on it, whether it's a museum or in a monastery or going to a different country. So these are all the people that work with our nonprofit team. We're grateful for the opportunity to work in source communities and monasteries, but there certainly are some dangers. These have all happened to me. Rabid dog attacks and bites 3 times. Monkey with brain virus attacks. It was really awful. Deathly bacterial infections, quite common. Theft of cash, credit cards, passports. Long air flights in economy. And very low pay, just your expenses. We work in traditional monasteries. When we work in monasteries, there's traditional usage, which includes damage from very respectful handling and storage. We have deep respect for the centuries-old traditions. We are nowhere or in any way criticizing traditional usage that may, in a material sense, affect sacred art forms. And especially we don't criticize within monastic contexts. It's very different from working in a museum. What we do teach is risk assessment. Risk assessment is preservation of historical treasures in monasteries to protect against further damage. It depends completely on the knowledge and disaster preparedness of the caretakers within the monastery, not on external efforts of people coming and going. Risk assessment is used in communities everywhere for various things, but I decided to apply this to monastery art in monasteries. Every single category is applicable in the monasteries where we share this. Buddhist Door did a video about this. If you'd like to learn more, I'll send it to you. It's a unique approach. However, when I introduce this approach of risk assessment within monasteries and communities and disaster planning, it always goes very well because these risks and disasters happen so often. Whereas when I teach it in conferences, Western conservation conferences or museums, I mean, they're just not expecting most of these risks to happen to their art collections. These monks want to know what are the risks to the texts, tankas, and statues in our monasteries. And they have the rodents, they have rain, they have theft. They know the risks. Risk assessment is very practical. I also teach the risks when I work with younger people from source communities who are in the West. This is at the Rubin Museum, one of the last programs we held there before it closed. And I'm working with Nepali youth for learning about documentation and risk assessment for tankas. It's very important in museums, especially in source communities, to have safe storage. Safer storage areas can really make a difference whether sacred art will last for 5 years or 500 years. This is very traditional, and the caretaker wears a kata over his face so he's not breathing on these tankas. He is respectfully putting them back in the trunk so that no one can see them and the rats won't eat them. However, the tankas physically, from a physical point of view, are crushing each other, and he's handling them in the middle, and his fingers are crushing the paintings. He's been filling the butter lamps, and there's butter lamp grease going on the tankas, etc. But he's being very respectful in a traditional way. This is what happens to many tankas when they are respectfully treated, being rolled up, unrolled, etc., being carried by the center. When we work in monasteries, we definitely are low cost and practical in our suggestions. We don't say you have to buy expensive acid-free tissue like museums. We don't do that. For safer storage, we suggest they use organic or clean cotton, boil it, and then dry it in the sun for use in safe storage. And this can also be reused. We also work with monasteries and communities to remap the storage areas they already have. And they can build new storage facilities by using their local carpenters. Here's an example where I did that. One place where storage is 100% important is in cham dance costumes. Those of you who know cham dance, it's traditional sacred dance once a year, and the costumes and attributes that the dancers hold are beautifully historical, and they're also very expensive. Yet at the end, they're stuffed into trunks, and the boots are stuffed into bags, and they get damaged that way. So I thank the Kensei Foundation for funding this video that we made, and this one has the Tibetan voice speaking, although we have many other voices, but it has English subtitles. I'll play the whole thing for you.
Terma sungchopa yongthar. Nompe terma minyam sungchop jungkhung. Chamge cha chepe kapla chem jizung savsav tine zöna jana lomong netup. shabchak dakpo jape kapla tingbe yana phe recha so kha khon jongpa ina cham jape kapla shabcha söpa tha depo ye.
That's just stuffing from pillows, fresh pillows.
Chamki mba techo tembo tha kujap tha dembe tingbe tha recha thukpo tumne thilwa ina zöna shana minyam sungchop yong.
Thank you for Kensei Foundation for funding that video. So this is from a Western Dharma Center. We're talking about risk assessment. This is display, not storage. This is a rare series of paintings by Ojen Togyal Rinpoche, O.T. Rinpoche. And they're on display in this Western Dharma Center. And it's regular glass, not ultraviolet filter glass. And it's in the bright sun and is visibly fading. And every time I go by with my light meter and say that light damage is irreversible, I'm getting nowhere. It's still hanging up. I mean, the fact is that even in Dharma centers, they really care and respect for their sacred art, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't learn a little from risk assessment. Definitely. This makes me sad. So when we teach conservation in a very practical way, we teach risk assessment and documentation. These monks are practicing documentation because documentational and technical information is theirs to learn and theirs to share with future generations. Confidentiality is important. So when monks and nuns and community members document within their source communities, we are not asking to take away their documentation. We don't want it. We want them to keep their documentation of their own sacred art treasures so that it's completely confidential. This is very, very important. We've looked at monasteries, Dharma centers. Let's look at your sacred art in your homes. A lot of people who are watching this maybe have tankas, etc., in their homes. And if you have grandchildren or children, you know that this sometimes can be a challenge because the Buddhist art is very, very attractive. She's fond of that statue. But then again, you have centuries of children growing up in source communities with Buddhist art as well. In traditional homes, the family shrine is up high, and it's usually in the seating area. There often is not enough space to have a separate shrine room. And these are the treasures in this home that we're talking about, we hope that a family members will inherit. In a home shrine, for example, in remote Nepal like this, it's high, it's kept separate, and we're truly hoping that these can be preserved through and when out-migration takes its toll. Corporate art collecting was a big thing for a while in the US, and I worked with the Rubin Collection in their multi-plant office. But even in small offices and your home office, you can show respect to the sacred art if empowered sacred art that you have there for various reasons. It also depends where you work. This is a father and son in remote Nepal in a village. We were working with them on risk reduction, risk assessment, and documentation. This is their workplace, the father and son, for generations. They've been the lamas and community leaders, and they were so interested in documenting what was in the temple, some things they hadn't looked at, and they're documenting the history of it. It's quite possible to be invited into the community and actually share something that's useful to the community, so that when we leave, they're totally independent with the risk assessment and documentation, safe storage, etc. That's the goal. We don't have much time left, but I want to share with you that I had the honor of working in Yushu, being invited by Rinpoches of several remote monasteries to learn about risk assessment and documentation. This was the goal. This is last year. And I'm returning there just next month, the end of this month, to go to several monasteries, Surmang and other monasteries in Yushu on the Tibetan Plateau, to work with documentation. Last year, they brought their monastery treasures for conservation advice. There were rare Bunpo texts on birch bark, very rare, and there were tankas that were their lineage tankas that they could not see the details of anymore. And they asked me if they could somehow be revealed, the iconography of the lineage tankas. And I said, we needn't actually so-called clean. We're not going to do any conservation treatment, but stabilization. What we're going to do is use the magic of light in your own smartphone on an inexpensive app. And through that, we brought out all of the lineage figures that the eye could not see. This picture is used with permission, as all are. This is an example of the magic of light in a very inexpensive app I use on my phone. My translator friends love this. Either on the back of a tanka or the front of a tanka, when you have writing your images, these apps have various spectra of light. And it's post-capture, so you're not damaging the original. And you can bring up so much that the eye can't see. We love conservation science. We have donated to our conservation nonprofit these small units, which read and they log the temperature and relative humidity and light levels, some of them in remote communities. We give these away to communities and monasteries. They found them immensely useful to find out what the environment actually is in their temples and storage rooms and homes. They download the data to their own smartphones and computers. It's very, very simple. And we give these away for free. Continuing on, we would like to invite all of you and those watching to join us in our treasure caretaker training projects coming up. In September, we have our yearly Preservation of Traditional and Contemporary Tanka and Pauba sessions. It's for a week, and we travel around to Tanka painting studios, and we visit traditional Nawari temples, and we also are invited to museums to do risk assessments. We invite you to join us this September. This is last year. We were doing a risk assessment by invitation at the National Museum in Kathmandu. To end, I'd like to share with you some of the feedback we get from places that we work. At Sumnak Lamagwan Temple, you have served our community well. We, the people of this place, are joyful about this in regard to your hard work and peaceful disposition while repairing the damage and restoring the bodies of our deities. Our minds have gladdened, and we, the people, and I myself in particular, the Lama, offer you our heartfelt thanks. Treasure Caretaker Training Team served Rajan Nunnery very well for more than 3 weeks. You preserved 1,000 Chenrezi Tsatsa and some tankas very nicely. So we, all the nuns, are very happy for that. Thank you very much from our heart. And we're grateful to Buddhist teachers who continue to advise us on wherever we go and the projects we're working on. This is from Minju Rinpoche. Thank you. Now it's time for your questions. I want to thank you for your patience, but also like to say that in my 55 years of research on these very topics, devotion, eternalism, and conservation, my approach, which differs from other conservators, starts with devotion. And science is in the service of devotion, in the service of the teachers and the communities that we're privileged to serve in. That's her thread of continuity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. What a visual feast that was. And thank you for the informative and engaging and practical presentation about Buddhist art conservation, your journey in getting there, and also for highlighting all of the complexities and the joys of the work that you do, and how fun to see a little example of how Kensei Foundation has funded some of your work.
I'm great.
As you know, we have set some time for discussion, for Q&A. So please type any questions you may have in the KF Q&A chat box. We do have one question, but I think I'll start with my own, if that's all right, Anne. I guess obviously your work is amazing and you are reaching so many monasteries. Are you kind of the only one raising the issue, or are you finding that the monasteries are taking your suggestions and passing them from one to the other? Is it consistent in certain communities? Like, do you notice in some communities they're better at looking after their treasures than others? That was many questions, but mostly, you know, are you aside from, obviously you have your own team, but are you sort of the ringleader for this movement?
Well, I think Westerners have been going in and out of monasteries for a long time, for quite a while, and they bring their own points of view. I feel it's, and our nonprofit is very sparsely funded. We have the privilege of working where we're invited and work directly in a way for the heads of lineages who invite us in. Of course, there are groups with major funding and who manage to go places to source communities, and perhaps they do other kinds of work from a different point of view. It is true that almost every day I get, mostly on social media and WeChat, WhatsApp, a lot of requests for our teams to come there. We are sparsely funded. And again, I always ask advice from my Buddhist teachers, which project to follow through on. There is a fair amount of funding coming from universities, etc., to go into communities and do different kinds of work. I'd say our approach is different because it combines devotion and respect with conservation science to that level. But certainly through the centuries, people have been going into monasteries and doing things. Yeah, I'm very grateful again to my Buddhist teachers for their guidance in how to approach this.
Great. Well, it sounds like it takes a village of people interested and who are willing to do the work.
Yes.
So I'm glad you're not alone. It's great that there are universities and so many other sort of people who are willing to, you know, to invest in this effort. So I will now read from our viewers. Our first question, which is actually two questions. How have attitudes changed towards sacredness and empowerment as legitimate concerns for conservators since you began your work? So I'll ask the next question to you respond.
Never quantify the effect of any work that I've done. So I would never take credit for anything like that. Any small amount of knowledge that can be shared is really important. Technical knowledge in source communities. And when I'm invited into museums to work with the staff of major museums, any small amount of information about respectful approach is also important. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share information appropriate to where we're working. But I would never take credit for a major change of approach.
I may be reading this a little bit differently, but I think the question asker might be wondering about, contemporary attitudes towards the importance of empowerment of the paintings, if that has changed since you began your work.
Yeah, sadly, this is an answer to that. Sadly, there's a movement to over clean and over restore tankas and statues to the aesthetic of when you go into a museum and you go to the great master Western paintings, you don't see one speck of damage. People like me, conservators, we just paint out all the damage. They're so perfectly restored, etc. And that's because those paintings have varnish layers. So we work with them completely differently. But to try to work with an empowered, for example, tanka painting or Pawa painting, which is the Nepali version of it, it's a different stream of sacred painting, the Nepali Pawas. They have no varnish layer. And so the better way to preserve them is leave them as they are with simple stabilization treatment. And then you can visually bring up how they might have looked, either for aesthetic reasons, aesthetic drive, or for you want to see the deities for visualization in the virtual realm. You can do that in the virtual realm, but you can leave the historic original as it is. This is really important. And the key to this is that through the centuries, tankas were not restored. The paintings were not restored. The mountings might have been changed, but the painting themselves were not cleaned and they were not repainted. Never. And I've seen maybe one example, and that was from a very, very remote monastery that, and I'd say one. And so it's just recently where, and I'd say since the 70s, where art dealers wanting to sell paintings and statues have just cleaned them to the extent that might be done to Western art for a Western museum. And there's no need to do that. Perhaps it would bring a higher price at the moment or make someone happy for the moment. But we're just guardians for this generation. And we would like future generations to have the full blessings and empowerment and the visual information of what an original, historic, blessed work of art looked like. So this is the key. There's no need for over-cleaning and over-painting. We can just keep the originals as they are in a respectful way, and you can create a new version of it in the digital realm. This is the most respectful.
Okay, so the second question is, would you comment on traditional monasteries and other communities and their openness now to Western/scientific approaches to conservation?
Well, I work all over the world, and there are many different communities. and each monastery has its own point of view about this. So I definitely would not like to make a comment that of such a broad spectrum of source communities. Definitely not.
Fair. Yeah. There's no general approach, it sounds like. Okay, great. Someone asks, I have a small collection of tanka in my home. When I move them, how should they be handled, since rolling will cause damage?
Yeah, we have a whole chapters about tanka care for Westerners. I'd love to share with you. It's I would love in our time to draw you diagrams and give you examples and get up from my seat and take an example down from the wall and show you how to do it. It is quite possible for you to move it safely flat. But if you absolutely cannot, then there are ways of rolling that are far safer than the traditional tightly rolled, where you have abrasion from the cover and where the back of the painting abrades the front, and the paint and ground layers are crunched every time you roll and unroll, creating a lot of damage. So there are safer ways to do everything. And since we specialize in the low cost and practical, at another time, I would love to do Zoom on tanka care. And sure, there are ways. Cheer up. Definitely.
I noticed you have quite a few YouTube videos. Are there any specifically showing the how best to
There are
handle
some that rolling
tanka?
technique included.
Great. Okay, and then we have Chiara Letizia saying, thank you for your amazing and very inspiring presentation. Could you tell more about the local museums that have been set up to preserve sacred family objects that have been abandoned due to emigration? How many are there? Is this just one case, or are there many more? And where are they located? For example, are they in the village, or are they within the monastery? And who looks after them?
Thank you so much for asking that question. This is new. This is something we're just developing. There are one or two, but every week I get a request from another monastery and another small village asking if we can help them develop their museum, their small museum. And we're really encouraging this. However, it's a matter of funding, because we'd like to send an architect in who's on our team to work with the community on placement of the structure and also architecture of the structure that is appropriate for that particular ground, mountain, rainfall, earthquake zone, etc. So there is funding involved. A lot of the communities realize that now that they have to get the funding to do it properly. There have been one or two that are on the way. In the Sum area, in that area, they are being built. And some monasteries have small museums. I know in Bhutan, some monasteries have museums. I feel the word museum is like a broad spectrum. It's like saying culture or religion. And it has to do with specifically what the community needs, what their location needs, how the building has to be designed, what type of artifacts they want to put in it, who's going to maintain them, do they want a display area as well as just storage? There are many considerations. So this is ongoing, and I think it's a very important topic that we're working on. And definitely there's funding necessary for us to continue for that. But I'm delighted that communities are looking into this, because otherwise without migration, there'll be a problem. However, another way to look at it is that there's some communities that are trying to reverse out migration. And I certainly approve of that. I hope that works as well. Oh, and when I work with the community, please remember that we offer technical information, but it's on their terms. We're invited in and we have respect for their needs and their approach. This is really important, especially with the museums.
At Thangka schools, painters learn to chant sacred chants while painting. Are there any other preparations worth mentioning in the creation of a thangka?
I know that some Thangka schools do and some don't. And these days, you're asking about Thangka schools. All of the historic Thangkas you see are workshop productions, like ateliers, like the great European master paintings were. They're like Rubens didn't sit there and paint everything. And he had a whole workshop, an atelier with apprentices. And it's the same with the Thangkas that you see, the historic Thangkas. There weren't Thangka painting schools. They were workshops of the masters. And a student would enter as a child and then go up through the different steps of apprenticeships till they themselves became a master, both in monasteries and in communities outside of monasteries. And so the schools just came along when the traditional funded workshop model waned for different reasons. And it's not really that easy to say whether every traditional Thangka workshop taught its apprentices to pray before they did this or that. I know that certain Thangka painting schools say that, and some Thangka painters I interview for 55 years say that they were trained to do that. Some say they were not trained to do that. However, what I find very interesting, again, is the class of Thangka painting masters who are also meditation masters, like, for example, the 8th Kamtrul Rinpoche, who created Thangkas out of their own vision. And the deities and Thangkas iconography they produce has not been seen elsewhere before. So one would assume that they're practicing the entire time. However, other Thangka painters who, especially these days, a Thangka painting sold, and then either the person who purchases it or the painter helps them to have a lama come and bless it for them. So there's a whole range of answers to your questions.
Mm-hmm. I guess on that topic, do you experience any sort of tension between your efforts to preserve Thangka and present day contemporary Thangka artists?
Oh, great question. I love present day contemporary artists. I absolutely adore them. And whenever they ask, we work together to find appropriate methods and materials for either eternalism or nihilism, however they want to approach it. Whether they want their painting to last forever, for centuries, for future generations, for the iconography, or whether they want it to fall apart in 5 years as their artistic statement. I love working with them. So methods and materials are not necessarily only geared towards longevity. Working with living painters has always been a joy for me. Even from 1970, working with living painters, I could interview them. And now I really love working with contemporary painters, helping them to do the best work they can with knowledge about available methods and materials that we can order in for them, or how to not to layer different kinds of paints, or there's so many different techniques, or how to create layers so that they'll fall apart faster. Whatever contemporary artists would like to know, I'm happy to share my information with them from a conservator's point of view, from a conservation science point of view. I love contemporary Thangka painters and sculptors. I love the work they're doing.
We have another question that says, of course, the big question is how would we go about having sacred and antique artworks assessed?
Assessed for what?
I imagine their monetary value. Or,
We do conservation assessments, and conservators never do financial evaluations. You have to find a certified appraiser for that. Whether
what about the former, assessed for potential degradation?
Yeah, definitely. Conservators, that's one thing we do. We do a thorough examination with an assessment, conservation condition assessment with reports, and all sorts of photography using different lights, different spectrum of lights, and of course, different expensive tools that are found in conservation scientist laboratories if we have them available, definitely. But so conservation condition assessment is distinct from financial values assessment. And often people do contact me and asking for me to say, tell them about the iconography and how much it's worth. And so I pass them on to a Buddhist scholar for the iconography, and I pass them on to appraisers, whether they work in auction houses or independently for the financial appraisals. But conservators don't do either.
I think probably our last question, which is very practical. Will you be having, Kensei Foundation, a follow-up Zoom for people to ask more specific questions? The talk was fascinating. So I think it would be great if we had a way for people to connect with you, and then, perhaps a follow-up Zoom can be arranged.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, for this Zoom, and I would welcome a follow-up. And I want to offer my sincere thanks to my Buddhist teachers for guiding me in this work for all of this time, and also to those who have come to this Zoom and asked your wonderful questions and your patience with my long explanations. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the Kensei Foundation, and thank you to all of you. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
As Anne herself said, it's time has come for us to close. We, of course, want to give our heartfelt thanks to Anne for sharing with us her time and her expertise and her experience. No doubt we have all learned a lot. Thank you as well to everyone from the Kensei Foundation team for putting this together, these lectures together. And of course, as Anne just said, for all of you for being here with us today.